Author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Whether the nation is ready for it or not, America's politicians are in full battle mode for what looks set to be a bruising set of November congressional elections. Every statement, every argument or cause célèbre raised has been weighed and measured for its vote-driving potential. We are well and truly in the not-so-golden age of 100% narrative. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, here on the Radio American Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides, and on today's show, we're going all in on whether Joe Biden's 2023 budget is just a campaign ad to stave off near-certain midterm defeat. We have a special Signature Say What segment with longtime host of this here show, Tim Donner. We ask just how bad the numbers are for the Oscars and why they're falling so rapidly. And with the new partisan push to have Justice Clarence Thomas removed from the Supreme Court bench, we're talking Liberty with Scott D. Cassenta to ask why Democrats don't think this will be a quid pro quo moment for Justice Sonia Sotomayor. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Knoxville, Tennessee on WETR 760 AM and 92.3 FM. Thanks for being here. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNationRadio.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows that will whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. So without further ado, let's get started. President Biden has released his 2023 budget wish list. But beyond the media headlines eager to sell every Biden decision as a new deal for America, what are the details? And more importantly, how would these policies impact Americans? Well, to help us navigate the stormy waters of this narrative, we're joined by economist and author Andrew Moran. Welcome back to the show, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew, give me the broad strokes look at the figures involved here. What's he asking for?
Well, of course, the headline number is $5.8 trillion.
Now, what's the real number?
$5.8 trillion. That's the headline number. That's the key number that he's asking for, which is still one of the biggest in the United States history. What he asks for, I mean, it's pretty much, nothing really controversial about it. He wants money for Ukraine. He wants more money for global health security. He wants money for green energy projects, money to keep the government functioning. It's not so much what he's spending, though. I think the real thing about this budget is how he's going to confiscate more wealth from the American people. If you look at the tax rates, I mean, all the taxes are going up, or there's new tax proposals. The corporate tax rate goes up to 28%. The top individual tax bracket goes to 39.6%.
Let's dive into that.
Billionaire. Hold on. Sorry, one moment. Sorry. Also, he wants a billionaire's tax was 0.01% of the top earners.
Well, let's go through a few of those, actually. So,
sure.
Corporate tax rate, 28%. Am
Yes.
I right in thinking that this will make business in America uncompetitive? And if they have the means and the opportunity and the motive, it sounds like a murderer, that businesses will leave for less tax-heavy climes. Is that pretty much the expected reaction?
Yeah, well, see, the problem with the corporate tax rate is that now in this environment, you have this global minimum tax of 15% that the OECD countries established. So it's very difficult for companies to try to find lower tax havens because of this 130-nation agreement that the U.S. joined also in December. So when you have a 20% corporate tax rate, I mean, where else are you going to go to? I mean, is it worth to completely shift operations, let's say, I don't know, Luxembourg for a 22% tax rate when you can be functioning in the world's largest economy? But at the same time, I mean, yeah, you do have, if you compare the corporate tax rates to capital outflows, you typically see that. I mean, they mirror each other when you have, capital fleeing the country, when you have higher corporate tax rate. At the same time, also, if you want to look at what President Trump did when he slashed corporate taxes, corporations really responded by benefiting their workers, which was, which a lot of people complain about that corporations don't do, but they did. They raised salaries, they offered all these different compensation packages, they reinvest in the workplaces. So higher corporate tax rates is not a good thing. I mean, you don't want to do that at all, especially in this environment when companies are trying to resuscitate from the pandemic.
All right. Now, one of the most bizarre elements for me is also in the tax arena, and it was on unrealized gains for the wealthy. Now, does this literally mean what I think it means, that people have to pay taxes on money that they haven't yet earned? Because if that's true, it seems ridiculous.
Yeah, it is absolutely ridiculous. But the problem, but the problem right now is that the unrealized capital gains tax only targets billionaires. So there's not going to be much pushback right now for this. What the real concern is, and I spoke to a market analyst about this just this past week after the budget was announced, is that he's worried that this is a gateway tax, that you're going to start with billionaires, and then it's going to be a slippery slope. Then you're going to target millionaires, and then you're going to target six-figure households, and then you're going to introduce all these different taxes that impact middle-class folks.
That was exactly my next question, Andrew. Is something like this likely to eventually spread to the middle classes? Because it seems that literally anything that starts out as just purely top level, it eventually gets foisted upon those who, quite honestly and with the best of intentions, thought, well, this is a tax on billionaires. This isn't going to affect me. And then a few years down the line, what's happened to my 401k?
Exactly. You saw this when the income tax was introduced, more than 100 years ago. It only targeted the top wealthy earners, and now everyone's paying an income tax. No matter even if you're in $20, you got to pay tax on all this nonsense. So yeah, I mean, it eventually is going to spread. Maybe not directly at first. Perhaps it's going to seep into the system, and thereby, you target billionaires, and then you're going to target brokerage firms, and then they're going to raise fees on their middle class traders. So it's going to have a more contagion effect as time goes by. Because yeah, Biden maybe he wants target billionaires, but then the next administration, who's desperate for more revenues, say, fine, we can target people who are making 999 million, and then that gradually goes down to, let's say, 100 million, and then 50, and then but you already know what people making 100 grand are being taxed on their on their stocks. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think this is something that people don't realize, that taxation has always been a slippery slope. Mm-hmm. It's, as you point out, it started with income tax that was supposed to be a temporary tax for the wealthy. And as the saying goes, there's nothing quite as permanent as a temporary government program.
Milton Friedman. That was Milton Friedman.
It was Milton Friedman, yeah. Of course, you're an economist. I thought it was Groucho Marx, but that's okay too. So let's talk realistically for a moment, though. We've got this spending, this 5.8. How much of what Biden is proposing, how much of it is going to stick if Democrats lose control of the House and or the Senate in November?
Yeah. All right. Okay. So I think most of it is going to stay, because here's the problem in Washington politics. So the Democrats are going to say they want 5.8 trillion, and then the Republicans are going to say, you know what, we need to cut this, we need to have more in line with these revenues, yada yada yada. And they're going to say, you know what, we want 4.9 trillion, and then they're going to meet the middle, and it's going to be a $5.3 trillion budget, and there's going to be more deficits, more debt, and just more increasing the size and scope of government. That's what these budgets always do. There's no being fiscally responsible, although Biden says that his budget is fiscally responsible, which is complete asinine if you look at all the numbers. But overall, I mean, it is, most of it's going to stick by the time the midterm elections come. I mean, don't fool yourself. That's not going to happen.
Now, I'm hearing that this will cut back on the national debt. Now, is that just DC spin? Am I right in thinking that how this long con works is that the programs that are in place, if they're not sunsetted, they actually add to a ballooning debt and deficit? Is that how it all works?
Well, even if the programs are sunsetted, there's still going to be, I think, a total of $14.4 trillion of deficits over the next 10 years, according to Biden's personal budget, 2023 budget. And it's funny, if you watch, if you listen to that that conference call that Cecilia Rose had and Shalanda Young, and they were telling reporters, one of the reporters asked, "Oh, how can Biden take credit for reducing the deficit when a lot of the pandemic era programs expired?" And Cecilia Rose said, "I have 3 letters for you. ARP." So I'm not suggesting that Biden spending more of the American Rescue Plan is going to somehow trim the deficit was complete nonsense. And this idea that trimming $1 trillion deficit over 10 years is going to amount to anything, it befuddles the mind. Because as I said, $14.4 trillion worth of deficits are going to be accumulated over the next 10 years. That doesn't account if a Republican president or another Democratic administration continues spending even more, and then that all adds to national debt. That takes up a greater chunk, and then when interest rates rise, that's going to be more of a net interest on the debt to service his debt. Right now, the administration is benefiting because the real interest rate's negative, so therefore the net interest payments are about negative $27 million. But according to his budget, which, if I might add, are quite subdued when it comes to interest rate outlook. He says they're going to pay about $1.3 trillion in debt servicing costs over the next 10 years, which would probably be more like $3 trillion if you take into account higher interest rates. So everything he's saying about the federal deficit is frustrating because it defies reality. It defies how the swamp works, and it doesn't. And the numbers are all subdued, which they admitted too. They're saying, "Oh, our numbers were locked in before the invasion, so that's why our inflation numbers are as low as they are." Blah blah blah.
All right, now let's cut to the chase, Miss Andrew.
Yes.
I'm thinking that this entire budget is an advertisement for the Democratic Party in the hopes of winning votes in 2022 November. What do you make of it?
I don't necessarily think so. I think the big thing for Biden and winning Democrats or Democrat votes in 2022 and perhaps 2024 would have been the Build Back Better agenda. I mean, that had more of the meat and potatoes of what Democrats want, especially when it comes to green energy infrastructure. This thing essentially just adapts to current situation in our post-pandemic environment, and then keeps the lights of Congress open. So it's the bare bones of the U.S. government. It's the Build Back Better and all these other pet projects of the administration that would appeal more to the Democratic base come 2022. Because if you look at this budget, it doesn't include, let's say, the child tax credit payments, which is what a lot of Democratic voters want, or Americans in general would like, free money to having kids. And that doesn't include that. If there was a budget that included that, which who knows, maybe Democrats will insert that when they have the budget talks or budget negotiations, then we'll have that, then perhaps that will appeal to the Democratic base. But overall, I don't think this budget alone is going to influence anybody to vote for the Democrats.
Okay, and final question for you, Andrew. Are we expecting a mighty Festivus report from Senator Rand Paul this coming year?
Yeah, exactly. I've been thinking that a lot too, especially when it comes to the whole Ukraine, because this budget includes, I think, an extra $5 billion for Ukraine on top of all the other tens of billions of dollars given to Ukraine. I guarantee you that Festa report's going to find something like, $300,000 went to some gender equality program in southeastern Ukraine, something of that complete nature. So yeah, there's going to be a big Festivus report coming this Festivus for the rest of us in December.
Andrew Moran, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up later in the show, we're talking Liberty with Scott DeCasenta to figure out whether Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and the squad can really force Justice Clarence Thomas off the Supreme Court bench. But up next, after this short break, we examine why the Oscars has gone from cultural icon to woke nonsense in such a short time, and why the viewing public is voting with their feet. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Well, it was all go at the Oscars this year, and the audience got something they hadn't quite bargained for. And the Academy itself also got something it hadn't quite bargained for, and that was a boost to the ratings numbers. Now, I don't claim to understand anything about Hollywood or how the Academy actually works. We're fortunate enough to be joined by national correspondent and host of the show The Politics of Hollywood, Kelly Ballard. Welcome, Kelly. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. I'm kind of excited to be on your show.
I'm very glad to have you here. So, Kelly, how bad are the Oscars viewing numbers historically?
Well, Mark, it's not the great stuff it used to be. In the 90s, there were more than 50 million viewers, but there were only about 280 million people at the time in the United States.
Right.
And then by 2014, there were 43.7 million viewers, but now the population was at 320 million. So, you got to take that into consideration.
Yeah, that's about a 30% drop. And what about from 2014 to now?
Well, from 2014 to about 2021, it fell off from 43.7 million to just 10.4 million. And then right now, the preliminary numbers for this one, 2022, it's only estimated that about 15.4 million even bothered to watch the show.
Now, I wonder if that's because obviously from 2021 to 2022, there is an increase there. But I wonder if that's not so much that people are more interested in what's happening at the Oscars, but more that it's being broadcast to so many larger markets. Now, it seems that there was a small bit of drama courtesy of Will Smith and Chris Rock, who was hosting the awards ceremony when Mr. Smith slapped Mr. Rock. Now, it's kind of made the ceremony more in the public eye, and I believe that more people have tuned in to watch that one aspect than they did for any of the actual awards. So it's not really for the right reasons that people are again engaged in the Oscars. What are your thoughts?
It's drama, it's entertainment, it's Hollywood, or like I like to say, Hollyweird. And it's not the first time that something like this has happened. I mean, remember Kanye West when he interrupted Taylor Swift for her acceptance speech by talking about how much he liked Beyonce's, or Marlon Brando turning down his award for The Godfather because he had a Native American woman accept it instead, and she relayed his message saying he would not accept the award because Native Americans were not treated equally in films. So it's the Oscars are becoming more political, just like with anything Hollyweird, and so that kind of, I think, makes people not want to watch it as much, because we watch entertainment. We watch for entertainment value. We watch for, movies and stuff to lose ourselves, not to get caught up in political drama from our heroes.
It seems that politics has entered almost everywhere where it's unwelcome. So people like their news, they like the newspapers, but now it's in TV shows. There has to be a certain element of wokeness involved for a show to even get made on most major networks nowadays. And movies have a criteria for who they want in the movie, what the story will be about. And if it doesn't fit those things, it doesn't get made. And I think that the silver screen is all the poorer for it. Now, on a brief side note here, Kelly, there's a lot of chatter going around. Now, some of it's a little bit ludicrous and some seems more, at least intentionally honest. And it's the same thing that happened with Janet Jackson's Super Bowl wardrobe malfunction. There was talk at the time, and still is, I suppose, that it was actually a setup, that it was framed to boost flagging interest. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of chatter on social media suggesting that very thing. They say things like Will Smith didn't slap Chris hard enough and that Chris kind of leaned into it, but I don't know about that, because he really Will Smith didn't do himself any favors if it was all a setup.
Well, he got a lot of bad press, but he did go on to win I believe it was the Best Actor award and is the man of the moment. And of course, people are watching elements of the Oscars again. That reminds me that the Golden Globes hosted by Ricky Gervais, it seems that everybody watches Ricky Gervais's put-downs of the Hollywood celebrities, but not so many people actually watch the awards ceremony itself. What do you make of that?
Again, it's drama, it's comedy, it's a relief from today's world and the wokeness and everything that's going on. I think it's all about entertainment and what's going to make us laugh or gasp or, just get excited with our characters and our actors and actresses, and it's entertainment.
Check out Kelly's Politics of Hollywood column weekly on LibertyNation.com. Kelly Ballard, thanks ever so much for being here.
Thank you, Mark. See you next time.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. Remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation from 2 to 3 p.m. on Sunday on KBKW 103.5 FM, 1450 AM, the talk of Grays Harbor. Further down the line, we figure out if it's even possible for Democrats to remove Justice Clarence Thomas from the Supreme Court. But up next, a special Say What signature segment with the longtime host of this here, Liberty Nation Radio, Tim Donner. Now don't go anywhere, you're not going to want to miss this. Right back after this break. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to the show. And now we have a special signature Say What extravaganza with longtime host of this here Liberty Nation Radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. Let's hear what the chattering classes are chatting about. Over to you, Tim.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And as we launch the spring into spring edition of Say What, all eyes are on the 46th President of the United States. We pray Joe Biden will act with wisdom, honor, and courage in response to Vladimir Putin's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. But the signs are hardly promising. In fact, this president is playing into the worst stereotype of himself, ad-libbing lines that have to be immediately walked back. In fact, a trio of gaffes as we reach the first month of the war in Ukraine has set everyone on edge, even as he later denied saying what he said or meaning what he said.
If chemical weapons were used in Ukraine, would that trigger a military response from NATO?
It It would trigger a response in kind.
Look at how they're stepping up. Look at how they're stepping up. And you're going to see when you're there, and some of you have been there.
We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principle, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. I'm not walking anything back. The fact of the matter is I was expressing the moral outrage I felt toward the way Putin is dealing in the actions of this man. Just brutality.
Are you worried that other leaders in the world are going to start to doubt that America is back if some of these big things that you say on the world stage keep getting walked back?
What's getting walked back?
It made it sound like, just in the last couple days, it sounded like you told U.S. troops they were going to Ukraine. It sounded like you said it was possible the U.S. would use a chemical weapon, and it sounded like you were calling for regime change in Russia, and we know
none of the three occurred.
None of the three occurred?
None of the three.
So this president thinks he can simply deny saying what hundreds of millions of people actually saw him say. Only a politician. And the biggest political beneficiary of the disaster that has been this presidency is, of course, the non-politician who preceded Joe Biden.
You could take the 5 worst presidents in American history and put them together, and they would not have done the damage Joe Biden has done in just 15 months. In just over a year, he has managed to literally kill the American dream.
That's Trump at a rally in Georgia, and a poll shortly thereafter from Harvard-Harris shows Trump defeating Biden 47% to 41%. And perhaps the only good news for this president is that while he trails Trump by 6 points, his vice president, who was supposed to be lined up to run on her own in 2024, trails by 11 points. But before we get to 2024, here come the midterm elections this November, with Republicans poised to make enormous gains, not through anything they've done, but because of how toxic the Democratic Party brand has become. The GOP might take control of the Senate, but they almost certainly will gain the majority in the House. And the third-ranking House Republican, Elise Stefanik, promises that when they do, they will blow the doors off the scandal surrounding Hunter Biden that was suppressed by elite media during the presidential campaign.
Big tech colluded with the mainstream media to censor this story. We've always known the laptop is real, but we're going to hold this administration accountable, hold the president and his family accountable. Hunter Biden's investments in the Chinese Communist Party. Potential pay-to-play and corruption and criminal issues when you have Russian oligarchs funneling millions of dollars to Biden family businesses. Joe Biden's meeting when he was sitting vice president with shady characters. And the big guy. We know the big guy is Joe Biden. We need to have Hunter Biden under oath. If he won't testify, he needs to be subpoenaed.
Well, she certainly sounds serious about this, doesn't she? But the Republican who's making the most noise and the biggest splash right now is the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who seems destined to run for president one of these days and is behaving as such, recently signing into law a ban on public schools teaching very young children about sex, which is somehow a controversial idea these days. The left has derided the bill as the so-called "don't say gay" law. But DeSantis proudly spoke of the reasons for it, both general and specific.
We have seen curriculum embedded for very, very young children, classroom materials about sexuality and woke gender ideology. We've seen libraries that have clearly inappropriate pornographic materials for very young kids. And we've seen services that were given to students without the consent or even knowledge of their parents across the country. Martin County had a gender transition plan that can be implemented without the parents' consent. In Florida and other places, school for very young kids, the genderbread man. So this is trying to sow doubt about kids, about their gender identity.
Indeed, that is the agenda of the progressive movement, emasculate the country, tear down traditional notions of male and female. Google lists 72 separate gender identities. 72. And one of the places most enthusiastic to promote gender fluidity, of course, is Hollywood, which got a black eye of mammoth proportions, larger than even the one Chris Rock likely got after the slap heard around the world by Will Smith. And their colleague Jim Carrey went into deep lament about Smith getting a standing O after that and the lost glamour of his industry.
You do not have the right to walk up on stage and smack somebody in the face because they said words. I was sickened. I was sickened by the standing ovation. I felt like Hollywood is just spineless, en masse. And it really felt like, oh, this is a really clear indication that we're not the cool club anymore.
Indeed, for Hollywood, the thrill is gone. Many would say long gone. Mark, back to you.
Yep, it seems the glory days of the silver screen are certainly in the rearview mirror, and some would say good riddance and goodbye to that particular brand of wokeness masquerading as empathy. Tim Donner, thanks for being here. Really, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Democrats want to impeach Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Well, of course they do. Wheels are in motion in the upper echelons of Joe Biden's party that if Thomas doesn't recuse himself from certain cases, well, it's all political theater at the expense of the Supreme Court's reputation. Now, joining us for this jaunt through the minds of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, grab onto your hats, is Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor and host of the excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott DeCosenza, Esquire. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Mark, and the squad, too. And just for Justice Thomas, in case he's listening, he also has the option to resign, according to those folks as well. He doesn't have to recuse
That's very
himself.
magnanimous of them, I believe. Yeah, my last count is there's 27 Democrats who are presently on call for this move. And of course, the more left-leaning media seem to be giving it quite a lot of credence. Now, let's get to the details first, Scott. Can it happen?
Well, so let's divide. You said 27. Was that the right count?
That's the latest count that I've got, yeah.
There are not all of those people say that Justice Thomas must resign or be impeached. That's the sort of squad level wish list, right? I mean, there are still some who are just on the recusal train.
Presumably, Scott, though, that comes with a proviso, right? That if he doesn't decide to recuse himself, and it's only he that can recuse himself, or maybe Chief Justice John Roberts can recommend that he recuse himself, I believe. But if he doesn't, then the threat is impeachment.
It's out there, right?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about it. So how one impeaches a Supreme Court justice is how one impeaches a president of the United States. And since we just went through that with Donald Trump.
Along partisan lines, okay.
We just went through it with Donald Trump, of course, so it should be relatively familiar. There's a bill that goes through the Congress, a bill of impeachment, and if a simple majority of congresspersons says that they want to impeach Justice Thomas, then he will be "quote unquote" impeached. Then
that's in the House, and then
it's in the House of Representatives, and then the question becomes: will he be removed from office? To be removed from office, they'll have to muster a 2/3 vote against him in the U.S. Senate to remove him from office. So that's how it could happen. It's not going to happen, of course, Mark, because I just said 2/3 vote in the Senate, which means that 15, 16, 17, depending on who's voting all in. Voters, Republican senators in the Senate would have to vote to remove Justice Thomas from office, which I doubt you could get more than 1 or 3, but I can't imagine a universe where more than 10 Republican senators vote to remove Justice Thomas from office, largely because of the political activities of his wife.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So Virginia Ginny Thomas, she exchanged text messages, or sent text messages at least, to Mark Meadows, who I believe was former chief of staff under Donald Trump, regarding the activities on January 6th.
Well, these texts started just after Election Day, as I understand it. The texts have been leaked to some legacy media types by, we presume, members of the January 6th House Committee.
Let's just delve into that a second, because that is the presumption, isn't it? But
so this is all about,
was there anybody else who had access?
I think we should just reset the frame here for a second. What is this about? This is about leveraging that information against Justice Thomas to the benefit of these Democrats. So the information was leaked primarily by the most prominent Washington newspaper and I think CBS News. And they didn't actually publish all these text messages. They've just published excerpts that are presumably the most damning. And I say presumably because presumably the whole effort to leak and publish them was a political effort rather than a news reporting effort. Now, the thing that I think is just interesting, Mark, is when I first came in contact with the material in terms of looking at the quotes and reading the stories about the quotes by the people who've read not just what's been released, but what's been held back, is do any of these text messages between Ginny Thomas and Mark Meadows, do they all mention Justice Clarence Thomas or the work of the Supreme Court? Because that's when it would become an issue that would affect Justice Thomas on the court, right? If they're saying, well, if she says, oh, I can get Clarence to vote any way I want because I'm his wife or something along those lines, which of course it doesn't say anything like that to the best of our knowledge. It just discusses her wishes for how Meadows and Trump and regular Republican types can sort of work against Democrats.
Which is what you'd expect from somebody who is a conservative activist, I guess.
So the other thing about Virginia Thomas is that she didn't just recently discover her political activism or something like that. When she met Justice Thomas, she was already a committee person for a very high-ranking Republican at the time, Dick Armey. So she was on Dick Armey's staff, and so she's always been in the political game. It just, and she and Justice Thomas have stated basically that he's not aware of the, every jot and tittle of her political organizing and campaigning, and she is not apprised of the intimacies of his work on the court.
Okay, so let's talk about the reasoning behind this. Now, clearly there's political gain for Democrats here if they can talk about impeaching and removing a sitting United States Supreme Court justice. But you and I have discussed this prior to our chat here, Scott, and I guess we both figure that this is perfect for raising money. It's a dollar win situation, isn't it?
Well, we talked about AOC's tweets, which kind of expanded the window of acceptable analysis on this for Democrats, which was pushing impeachment. And where's the downside for somebody like AOC? Are people who consider Justice Thomas a beloved and sage counsel on our highest court going to support AOC in electoral endeavors? Not bloody likely, right? Not going to write her checks or anything like that. Meanwhile, all the people that dislike Justice Thomas will flock to her and buoy her with support in all manner of speaking, both sort of the intangible supports and perhaps dollar checks as well. And also it gets to distract her constituents who are no doubt feeling the pinch of this horrible inflation and other crushing policies that she's advanced as she runs for re-election. She can turn their attention from something that's a negative to something that she can, get on a soapbox about.
I think the thing that concerns me about this new round of talks about Clarence Thomas is that it kind of opens the door in some ways from these people who want him removed to say that, well, if we can't get him off the bench, then we need to mitigate the damage that he does. And that brings back talk of court packing, which I think even the report that President Biden had commissioned said that this was an untenable situation because of the partisanship and division and essentially the never-ending stop. So if we appoint 13 now, the next lot will appoint 23, and then and we'll end up with 10,000. Or in fact, everybody will be on the Supreme Court bench, Scott, including yourself.
Well, Mark, that will be a fine day to be sure. Even as I join my fellow, I don't know, we'll have to get to 50,000 justices maybe by the time that we'll see.
But you do own a Jabbit, which I believe puts you head and shoulders above most.
I hadn't thought of that. Yes. I just don't see how court packing is still alive. And what I mean by that is the president's own commission gave a sort of tepid response to court packing. And where is this political groundswell that's going to really motivate this change? I don't think that this is pretty thin gruel that, Justice Thomas's wife did something, and so now we have to pack the court. I just don't see the impetus there. And I'm not talking about my own political proclivities. I'm talking about the Democrats that will need to vote for this, to put another justice on the court. It just doesn't seem like it's that's very likely to happen. And then face the voters in November, right? So it's like,
well, that's what it's all about.
It's not like there's 2 years to smooth over their blatantly political court packing. It's like, to get it done, we're now, April's upon us, and how is this all going to get done and run a campaign? I don't know. I don't see that as a political possibility, really.
Okay, so back to Ginny Thomas. So she's sent these messages, and a lot of people have frowned on it, whether they were outlandish or not. But people seem to be ignoring other aspects, such as Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Well, Mark, what gave you the idea that there could be an issue there? Could it be my?
Well, I believe you may have a little tale for us, Scott.
In LibertyNation.com, I wrote about Justice Sotomayor's issues with politics, and the reason why I brought it up, of all the justices, Mark, she is far and away the most politically active with her pronouncements and actions. And I think that if Democrats or the squad members or whoever, some collection of Democrats goes after Clarence Thomas in any successful move, not to impeach him, but to initiate impeachment proceedings, then I think that Republicans, and we've just seen it now with the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearings, they will not let bygones be bygones when one of their justices is attacked. They paid back the attack on Kavanaugh in spades against Ketanji Brown Jackson, and I think the same thing would be true with Justice Sotomayor. That's a long way around to say if these things get heated into a impeachment campaign, why not then shouldn't Sonia Sotomayor be impeached? In Clarence Thomas's case, we have some communications that his wife made that we don't even know if he even knew about before he read about them in the newspaper, okay? Much less that he discussed them with her at the time. With Sonia Sotomayor, there is no third party involved. It's her own political behavior. She told some University of Texas law students that they should oppose abortion politically. She also sent messages of goodwill to other candidates. Basically, you're supposed to shed your Team Democrat bona fides when you get on the court, or Team Republican bona fides. But Sonia Sotomayor seems to have doubled down on hers rather than walking away from them.
Well, of course, we won't see things come to that, I'm sure, because this is Joe Biden. He is a unity president. Scott D. Cosenza, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's almost it for this episode of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. My sincere thanks to our guests, Andrew Moran, Kelly Ballard, Tim Donner, and Scott Cosenza. And of course, my thanks to you, the listeners, for taking the time to join us. Now, my parting shot for this week. Will Rogers, he once said, if you ever injected truth into politics, you'd have no politics. Well, it seems to me that we may have reached this point already. There appears to be not a single instance where the truth is not crafted to fit the narrative, where almost everything that comes from our politicians and our activist media has a predetermined spin. But it's by becoming wary and decoding that spin, starting to understand the end game, that all of these machinations that we encounter can finally be unraveled. We can finally be open and aware of real truth. And once that floodgate opens, there's really no going back. Thanks for joining me. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and others.
I can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.